Hey everyone, Shadow Rockets here, and on today's episode we're going to be discussing Precursors. Now these are the beings that were around before the Forerunners even, and they actually play a very large part in today's Halo. Now, like I said, they were pre-Forerunner, and that means that they kind of had that mantle or the role of guardianship of the galaxy and all life prior to them, and apparently, humans have it now from the Forerunners. So, but from the Forerunner perspective, the Precursors are kind of like the Titans to the Greek gods, and whereas the Forerunners are the Greek gods to the Titans. The Precursors were transcendent. They could make planets, they could make star roads. If you don't know what those are, you can go to one of my previous episodes, which I will conveniently post a link to possibly right now. Anyway, go ahead and watch that if you didn't. But just like the Greek gods and the Titans, the Forerunners actually slaughtered all of the Precursors. Even though the Precursors were way beyond them in the technological scale, the Forerunners still found a way to beat them, and even go as far as desecrate their bodies. And essentially just kind of ruin it all for the rest of us. Because, and it's kind of a spoiler, but there was a Precursor found later on. So some of the Precursors did survive. So I guess saying wipe them out is kind of a misnomer. But this last Precursor was determined to be a flood. I'm going to kind of talk about that later. He was a Gravemind. We're not quite there yet, though. I kind of want to talk about just kind of the background behind them. The Precursors were responsible for seeding the Milky Way with life, creating the galaxy's diverse composition of species, and just over time would judge whether a species was worthy of the mantle, their assumed role of guardianship of all life. The humanoid species native to the world of Jabalb, would come to be known as the Forerunners, who were next in line for this task. The species was eventually judged to be unworthy on taking of the mantle because the Precursors decided that the responsibility should fall on the shoulders of another of their creations, which would be humanity, hailing from Irde Tyrene. I butchered that. When the Precursors announced their decision to the Forerunners around 10 million BC, the latter furiously retaliated against their creators and drove them to near extinction. First in the Milky Way, and eventually in the satellite galaxy of Pathkathona. Only a small number managed to escape this campaign of extermination like I was talking about. According to the Precursors themselves, the Forerunners struck against their creators unprovoked, while certain Forerunners, who learned the truth later on, insisted that the Precursors had planned to wipe out the Forerunners first. A few Precursors that escaped or were spared by the Forerunners either went into suspended animation inside of tubes or became molecular dust and was eventually meant to regenerate their past forms. However, over millions of years, the dust became defective, failing to reconstitute the Precursors and instead inducing madness and mutations in life forms that came in contact with it, and we call that the Flood. The Precursors viewed the Flood as kind of a way to bring everything together into one unified body. Sorry, my kitten just jumped on me. Unified body in the galaxy, and they also kind of wanted to punish the Forerunners, so hence the Forerunner Flood War. They vowed that none of their creations would rise against them again. They also decided that all life would be deprived of free will and merged into one, and in the end, the sum of the Precursors' creation would be a reflection of themselves and the suffering their creations caused them. About 10 million years after the Forerunners' genocide of the Precursors, humanity had an interstellar empire, and it came in contact with the precursor powder, and over several centuries it cultivated the flood. Initially, the flood ravaged the human colonies, kind of growing in mass, until receding from the galaxy on its own accord, waiting for a better moment to exact their final revenge on the foreigners. Now, the flood actually did allow some humans to go uninfected, leaving the implication of a possible cure that would misdirect efforts in the next assault, while the truth of the humans' genetic attack on the flood was lost until it was far too late. Around that time, a human exploratory group discovered a small planetoid on the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, and this is where I'm really excited, which is going to be the next episode. Spoiler alert, it's the Primordial. Hidden away within it was a large stasis capsule, and it contained a being who they later called the Primordial. And this capsule was actually transported to the capital world of Churam Hakor, and they eventually found a way to communicate with the being. And this being was kept imprisoned. It was questioned a lot about the nature of the flood, and a little bit other things later on by actually installation runners and whatnot. So the problem is when the scientists actually questioned the Primordial on the nature of the flood, they were horrified so much that they actually all committed suicide. But around 10,000 years later, the Isodidac interrogated the Primordial on Installation 07, and it received vague responses as to the fate of the Precursors and their relationship with the Flood. And in enraged state, the Isodidac executed the Primordial. He faced his end with calm satisfaction, stating that the foreigner's defiance, and indeed its own death through the artificial passing of a billion years within an accelerating chronological field, which I want to do a video on as well, would only add up to the total sweetness of life's struggles, while asserting its confidence that all life will still succumb to the flood in the end. The Urdidac later discovered that the Gravemind retained thoughts and memories of the Primordial, demonstrating that they were one and the same. However, not even the Gravemind could fully access or comprehend the wisdom the Precursors once had, because it was flawed and fallen. Anyway, in the final hours of the Foreigners' war with the Flood, the Gravemind sent a group of imprinted humans, including Forthencho, Lord of the Admirals, to deliver a message to the librarian, who was stranded. Forthencho revealed to her the truth of Precursors, and that the domain was in fact the mythical Organon. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because I liked the fact that the domain was not their creation, the Foreigners. It's actually the Precursors' creation, the Organon. Same thing, it's just older. And the Organon would actually be destroyed later by the halo arrays firing actually immediately. Immediately later. By withholding this information until the very end, the Halo's activation could not be stopped, and the Precursors ensured that the Foreigners would unwittingly destroy all records of their history and cultural heritage, or kill their own soul, as phrased by the librarian. Essentially, the Foreigners really just wanted to cause all the sorts of pain that they could to the Precursors wanted to cause all sorts of pain to the Foreigners. Sorry. As for Precursor technology, they used neural physics. It is a concept that an inanimate matter and thought are inextricably linked, and that the universe itself is effectively a living entity. By drawing from the fundamental energies of the universe, the Precursors were able to build exotic, indestructible architectures and travel across interstellar distances using superluminal transit mechanisms, which were based on the same principle. The Halo weapon, being a neurological weapon, it is one of the main ways, one of the only ways really, to destroy or damage the Precursor artifacts. Now, I don't know if you remember my Star Road video again, but this is one of those such concepts that were just massive structures used from fibers of essentially life of the universe, and they were very dense materials, and it kind of makes sense now as to why the Flood could use them. It's not just that the Gravemind were amazing, you know, when they get huge, which they kind of are. It's mostly because they can piece together all of the dust particles and the bits and pieces of the old Precursors and kind of use their knowledge a little bit. But remember, they are tainted and fallen, and so they just can't get back to their former splendor. The most coveted Precursor artifact among foreigners is the Organon, and it was allegedly capable of activating all other Precursor artifacts. In truth, the Organon was synonymous with the domain, and it's just the foreigners. Essentially, the Precursor history was just the foreigners digging their own hole. So, I mean, that's kind of just how it worked out for them. Unfortunately, we can't really get in touch with the Precursors anymore. Maybe there will be something on this in the next Halo games with Chief talking to maybe some of the really, really old characters. I'm interested to see what happens with just all of this being put in, because I know that a lot of it was kind of brought up in the last Halo game. With Mendicant Bias. Everyone thought that Mendicant Bias was going to be the big bad guy in this one, or in Halo 5, and he actually talked with the Primordial. Spoiler alert with the Primordial story, sorry, that's going to be next week, but he talked to him, and that's kind of what convinced him to side with the Flood. So, or somewhat, it's actually kind of a gray area. Mendicant Bias is actually not that bad, kind of. Pretty bad, but hey, I mean, to each their own. Anyway, friends, if you like this video, if you learned something, don't forget to like, favorite, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next week. Shadow Rockets out.